her world shattered in the sterile silence of a lawyer's office. For 10 years, Lyra Hayes had been the loving, unofficial wife to billionaire innovator Julian Theron. She wasn't just his partner. She was the only mother his 2 children had ever truly known. She organized their lives, healed their fevers, and tucked them in at night in their sprawling Bel Air mansion. She gave him her youth, her devotion, her everything, assuming their future was as secure as his fortune. But when Julian died, suddenly his final will and testament was read. And in one soul-crushing moment, Lyra discovered the devastating truth. After a decade of sacrifice, she was left with absolutely nothing. Her name wasn't even mentioned. The California sun, a molten gold disk in the impossibly blue sky, always seemed to shine a little brighter on the Theron estate. Perched high in the hills of Bel Air, the sprawling mansion was a marvel of modern architecture, a symphony of glass white stone and infinity pools that bled into the horizon. To the outside world, it was the home of Julian Theron, the reclusive tech billionaire, the genius behind Theron Innovations and its revolutionary data encryption software. But for Lyra Hayes, for 10 years, it was simply home. It was where she had raised his children. Lyra remembered the day she first walked through the colossal, pivoting front door. She was 28, a bright, ambitious art curator with a promising career introduced to Julian at a charity gala in downtown Los Angeles. He was magnetic, with a mind that moved at the speed of light and a sadness in his eyes that intrigued her. He was a recent widower, his wife having passed away during the birth of their son Leo. He had a 2-year-old daughter, Mia, and a newborn who had never known his mother. Their courtship was a whirlwind of private jet trips to see art in Florence, and late-night conversations that lasted until the sunrise painted the Hollywood hills in shades of pink and orange. Julian wasn't a man who did things by halves. He fell in love with the same intensity he applied to his algorithms. But he was also a man shackled by his past. "Marriage, I can't," he had told her one night, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't quite decipher. "It wouldn't feel right. Not yet. Maybe not ever." But this, he had said, gesturing to the life they were building. "This is real. You are my family, Lyra, more than anyone." Lyra, deeply in love, had accepted it. She traded her modest Santa Monica apartment for the cavernous beauty of the Bel Air estate. She put her career on hold, telling herself it was temporary to help Julian navigate the treacherous waters of single fatherhood. But temporary melted into a year, then 5, then a decade. The children, Mia and Leo, became the twin sons around which her universe revolved. She was the one who taught Mia how to ride a bike, her own hands steady on the handlebars as Mia's wobbled. She held a cool cloth to Leo's forehead during a frightening bout of febrile seizures when he was 3, her calm voice a soothing anchor in the storm of Julian's panic. She planned their birthday parties, attended every parent-teacher conference at the prestigious Buckley School, and knew their friends, their fears, and their favorite bedtime stories by heart. Her photo was on the school's emergency contact list, right under Julian's. In every way that mattered, she was their mother. The staff, the chefs, the housekeepers, the groundskeepers, all called her Mrs. Theron out of respect, a title she would gently correct at first, but eventually let slide. It felt right. Julian adored her of that, she was certain. He showered her with gifts, a vintage Cartier watch for her birthday, a private collection of first-edition novels. She'd once admired a state-of-the-art studio on the estate grounds for her to paint in, should the inspiration ever strike again. He called her his anchor, his true north. They were partners, a team. They vacationed in St. Bart's, skied in Aspen, and spent quiet evenings by the fire after the children were asleep, their legs tangled together. A comfortable silence settling between them that spoke volumes more than words. Yet there was always a subtle, unspoken boundary. Her name was not on the deed to the house. The bank accounts were all his. When business was discussed, it was with his lawyers, his board members. She was the mistress of the home, the queen of the domestic sphere, but the keys to the kingdom were firmly in Julian's pocket. She pushed the unsettling thoughts away, chalking them up to insecurity. Julian was a protector. He would always take care of them. His actions, his love, his decade of shared life with her were more binding than any piece of paper, or so she believed. The day it all ended started like any other. Lyra was in the kitchen, a bright, airy space with marble countertops and a view of the canyon, discussing the week's menu with Maria, the head housekeeper. Mia, now a sharp-witted 12-year-old, was doing her homework at the breakfast bar, while 10-year-old Leo was enthusiastically explaining the rules of a video game he was designing. It was a scene of perfect domesticity, a snapshot of the life she had so carefully and lovingly built. The phone call came at 11:42 a.m. It was Julian's personal assistant, her voice strained and cracking. There had been an accident. Julian, an avid amateur pilot, had been flying his single-engine Cirrus SR-22 back from a tech conference in Palo Alto. Something had gone wrong. The plane had gone down in the hills near Paso Robles. The world tilted on its axis. The first few hours were a blur of frantic phone calls, of holding her breath, of praying for a miracle. But the miracle never came. By late afternoon, the news was confirmed. There were no survivors. Julian Theron, the tech visionary, was gone at 52. Grief was a physical force, a crushing weight that stole the air from her lungs. But her own sorrow had to be secondary. Her first, her only thought was of the children. Telling them was the single hardest thing she had ever done. Mia's precocious maturity crumbled, her face dissolving into the terrified sobs of a little girl who had lost her daddy. Leo simply stared, his big, dark eyes. Julian's eyes widening in uncomprehending shock before he burrowed into Lyra's side, his small body trembling. In the days that followed, Lyra became a fortress. She managed the relentless flood of condolences, shielded the children from the prying eyes of the media camped outside their gates, and began the horrific, surreal process of planning a funeral for the man she loved. She moved through the vast, silent rooms of the mansion, which now felt less like a home and more like a mausoleum. Her heart a leaden weight in her chest. Julian's sister Beatrice arrived from New York the next day. Beatrice was a formidable woman, a senior partner at a high-powered corporate law firm with a severe haircut and an aura of icy competence. She and Julian had been semi-estranged for years, their relationship a casualty of old family rivalries and clashing personalities. Beatrice had always looked down on Lyra, her disdain barely veiled behind a veneer of chilly politeness during her rare visits. She saw Lyra not as a partner, but as a glorified nanny, a beautiful distraction her brother had picked up. Lyra Beatrice said, her voice devoid of any real warmth as she stood in the grand foyer. "This is a terrible tragedy. Of course I will handle the arrangements." The implication was clear. "You are not family. You are not in charge." Lyra, numb with grief and exhaustion, did not argue. She allowed Beatrice to take the lead on the funeral logistics, focusing all her energy on Mia and Leo, who clung to her as if she were the last stable thing in their shattered world. The funeral was a grand, somber affair, attended by Silicon Valley titans, Hollywood celebrities and politicians. Lyra sat in the front row, flanked by Mia and Leo, her hand tightly gripping theirs. She listened to the eulogies, each one praising Julian's genius, his vision, his contribution to the world. But she felt a growing unease. They were talking about Julian Theron, the CEO. No one was talking about Julian, the father, the man who made terrible pancakes on Sunday mornings and could be reduced to helpless laughter by his son's silly jokes. A week after the funeral, the call came from the law firm of Sullivan and Cromwell, a name synonymous with old money and ironclad legal power. Mr. Alistair Finch, Julian's longtime personal attorney, requested her presence for the reading of the will. He specifically requested that the children not attend. Lyra felt a flutter of anxiety, but quickly suppressed it. This was just a formality. Julian had probably set up a trust for the children and made her the trustee. It was the only thing that made sense. They had discussed it vaguely years ago. Everything is for the kids and for you. You'll all be taken care of always. I promise, he had said. She dressed carefully that morning, choosing a simple, elegant black dress. As she was about to leave, Mia caught her hand. "Where are you going, Lyra?" the girl asked, her eyes still shadowed with grief. "Just to a meeting with your father's lawyer, sweetie, to sort things out." "Are you coming back?" Leo whispered, his voice small. The question struck her like a physical blow. She knelt, pulling both children into a fierce embrace. "Of course I'm coming back," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I am always coming back. This is our home. I'm not going anywhere, ever." She kissed their foreheads, held them for a moment longer, and walked out the door, her heart filled with a promise she believed with every fiber of her being that she could keep. She had no idea she was walking towards the guillotine that would sever her past, her present, and her future in one clean, brutal stroke. The offices of Sullivan and Cromwell were located on one of the highest floors of a skyscraper in Century City, a place that seemed to exist above the clouds, far removed from the messy realities of human emotion. The reception area was a hushed cathedral of chrome leather and dark polished wood. Lyra gave her name to the receptionist, whose smile was polite but didn't reach her eyes, and was ushered into a conference room with a panoramic view of the Los Angeles basin stretching out to the Pacific. Alistair Finch, a man in his late 60s with silver hair and a suit so perfectly tailored it looked like a second skin rose from the head of a long mahogany table. He had been Julian's lawyer for decades, a fixture at the periphery of their lives, always professional, always remote. Today his expression was one of solemn duty, as unreadable as a stone tablet. Seated to his right was Beatrice. She wore a Chanel suit the color of dried blood, and a single strand of pearls. She didn't bother to stand. Instead, she watched Lyra walk across the plush carpet with an expression of faint predatory amusement, her eyes like chips of ice. The sight of her sent a chill down Lyra's spine, a primal sense of warning that she tried to dismiss as grief-fueled paranoia. "Lyra Alistair Finch," said his voice, a dry rustle. "Thank you for coming. Please have a seat." Lyra sat opposite Beatrice, the vast expanse of polished wood, between them feeling like a battlefield. She placed her hands in her lap to stop them from trembling. "Alistair." "Beatrice." "Let's get straight to it," Beatrice said, her tone brisk and devoid of pleasantries. We're all busy people." Finch cleared his throat, a small, nervous sound. He opened a thick, leather-bound folder in front of him. "We are here today for the reading of the last will and testament of Julian Alexander Theron, dated May the 12th, 7 years ago." 7 years ago. A strange date. Lyra's mind flashed back. 7 years ago, Leo had just turned 3. They had taken a family trip to Hawaii. Julian had held her hand on the beach at sunset and told her, "I can't imagine my life without you and the kids. This is it. This is my forever." Why would the will be from then? They had discussed his arrangements much more. Recently. I, Julian Alexander Theron. Finch began to read his voice, a flat monotone. "Being of sound mind and body. Do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, revoking all prior wills and codicils." Lyra's heart pounded against her ribs. She focused on a point on the horizon, the distant silhouette of Catalina Island, and braced herself. Finch continued his words, precise and clinical. He read through a series of minor bequests, a vintage watch to his former business partner, a donation to his alma mater, Stanford University. Then he arrived at the heart of the matter. "All the remainder of my estate, including all real and personal property business interests, stocks, bonds, and digital assets, I bequeath to the Theron Children's Trust to be established upon my death for the sole benefit of my beloved children, Mia Catherine Theron and Leo Julian Theron." Lyra let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Of course, a trust for the children. That was exactly what Julian would have done. That was what they had discussed. She would be the one to manage it for them to ensure their lives continued with as much stability and love as possible. She felt a wave of relief wash over her. But Finch wasn't finished. The assets of the Theron Children's Trust, he droned on, shall be managed by a designated trustee who will have full authority over all financial, educational, and welfare decisions for my children until they each reach the age of 25. He paused, looking down at the document as if to confirm the next fateful sentence. A cruel, knowing smirk flickered across Beatrice's lips. "As trustee of the Theron Children's Trust, and as legal guardian of my children, Mia Catherine Theron and Leo Julian Theron, in the event of my death, I hereby appoint my sister Beatrice Eleanor Theron." The words hit Lyra like a physical blow. Air rushed from her lungs. The room seemed to tilt the view outside, blurring into a meaningless smear of blue and green. Legal guardian trustee Beatrice. It was impossible. A mistake. What? The word was a choked whisper. Finch didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on the paper. "Should my sister be unable or unwilling to serve, I appoint as successor, trustee and guardian, Mr. Alistair Finch of Sullivan and Cromwell." He closed the folder with a soft final thud. That concludes the reading of the will. Silence descended upon the room, thick and suffocating. Lyra's mind was a maelstrom of confusion and panic. She stared at Finch, then at Beatrice, waiting for one of them to say it was a terrible joke. I don't understand." Lyra stammered, her voice trembling. "My name. He promised. We talked about it. I'm supposed to take care of them." Beatrice finally spoke, her voice laced with a syrupy, false pity that was more insulting than open contempt. "Oh, Lyra, did you really believe that Julian was a sentimental man in some ways, but not when it came to his legacy? or his children. That's not true. Lyra's voice rose, cracking. He loved me. We were a family. You were a companion, Beatrice corrected her, leaning forward slightly. A very well-compensated companion, I'm sure. But family. Family is blood. Family is a piece of paper from a courthouse. What do you have, Lyra? A decade of memories. They're not legally binding. Every word was a perfectly aimed dagger. Lyra turned to the lawyer, her last hope. Alistair, this is wrong. There must be a newer will, a different document. We discussed it just a few months ago. He was going to make things official. Finch steepled his fingers, his expression impassive. This is the only valid signed will we have on file, Lyra. Julian was a brilliant man, but like many busy people, he could procrastinate on personal matters. If he had intentions to make changes, he tragically ran out of time. As it stands, this document is ironclad. Ironclad. The word echoed in the sterile silence. She looked from Finch's cold, professional face to Beatrice's triumphant sneer, and then she saw it, the truth. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't an oversight. This was a coup. The will was 7 years old, from a time when Beatrice and Julian were perhaps on better terms, a time before Lyra had become the unshakable foundation of his and the children's lives. Julian, in his grief and chaotic life as a new single father, had likely signed it and forgotten about it, always meaning to update it, always believing he had more time. And Beatrice had known. She must have known about this document waiting in the wings, like a vulture ready to swoop in and claim everything. So that's it, Lyra asked, her voice hollow. 10 years of my life, raising his children, and I'm just dismissed. I have nothing. I am nothing. Beatrice gave a delicate shrug. I wouldn't say nothing. You had a very luxurious lifestyle. Consider it payment for services rendered. She stood up, smoothing down her suit. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go and see my niece and nephew. My legal responsibility, I'm sure you can understand. The condescension, the absolute dismissal of Lyra's role of her love of the bond she had with Mia and Leo finally broke through the shock and grief, igniting a spark of pure, cold fury. They are not your responsibility, Lyra said, her voice low and shaking with rage. They are my children. In every way that matters, they are mine. And they need me. You can't just walk in and take them. Beatrice paused at the door, turning back with a final devastating smile. Can't I? She said softly. It seems, according to this very expensive piece of paper, that I can. The law is on my side. What's on yours? Goodbye, Lyra. The staff will help you pack your things. I'll give you 24 hours to vacate the premises. The door clicked shut behind her, the sound as final as a coffin lid closing. Lyra was left alone in the silent, sun-drenched room, the city sprawling beneath her, like a map of a world that no longer belonged to her. The promise she had made to Mia and Leo just that morning. I am always coming back. I'm not going anywhere. Ever. Mocked her the words turning to ash in her mouth. She hadn't just been left out of the will. She had been erased. The drive back to Bel Air was a surreal nightmare. Lyra's hands were slick on the steering wheel of the Range Rover. Julian's Range Rover. She realized with a fresh wave of nausea. Every landmark, every palm tree-lined street was a painful reminder of a life that had been stolen from her in the space of a 10-minute meeting. The words from the will ricocheted around her skull. Trustee, legal guardian, my sister Beatrice. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at her throat. The children. She had to get to the children. She had to hold them, to look them in the eye, and tell them that no piece of paper could break their family apart. She would figure out the rest later. She would fight Beatrice. She would hire lawyers. She would do whatever it took. But first, she needed Mia and Leo. She turned onto the winding private road that led to the estate, the familiar gates coming into view. She fumbled for the remote, pressing the button. Nothing happened. She pressed it again harder this time. The gate remained stubbornly shut. A new security guard she didn't recognize stepped out of the guardhouse, his arms crossed over his chest. He looked at her with an impassive, unhelpful stare. "There seems to be a problem with my remote, Lyra," said her voice tight, trying to keep the hysteria at bay. "No problem, ma'am," the guard replied, his tone polite but firm. "We've just updated the security codes. You're not on the access list. Not on the... I'm Lyra Hayes. I live here. Check the list again. I have my orders, ma'am. From the new head of the household, Miss Theron." Beatrice. She had moved that fast. 24 hours, she had said. But that was a lie. She wasn't giving Lyra a day. She was giving her nothing. She was locking her out while she was gone, seizing control like a military commander. "Please," Lyra begged, her composure crumbling. "The children are in there. They're my children. I need to see them. I'm sorry, ma'am. I can't let you in." Desperate. Lyra threw the car into park and ran to the gate, gripping the cold iron bars. "Mia, Leo." She screamed, her voice raw. "It's me. I'm here." She saw a flicker of movement in an upstairs window. Mia's bedroom. The curtain was pulled back for a fraction of a second, and she saw Mia's small, pale face, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. Their gazes locked. Lyra's heart leaped. "She sees me." But just as quickly, another figure appeared behind Mia, the severe silhouette of Beatrice, and the curtain was yanked shut. "No," Lyra shrieked, rattling the gate. "Let me talk to them." "You can't do this." The guard stepped forward. "Ma'am, you need to leave. If you don't, I'll have to call the police. The threat of police of being arrested outside." What was her own home an hour ago was the final humiliating blow. Defeated, she stumbled back to the car, her body racked with sobs. She tried calling the children's cell phones. Both went straight to voicemail. She called the landline to the house. It rang and rang, unanswered. Beatrice had cut her off completely. She was an exile, barred from her own kingdom, her children prisoners within its walls. She drove aimlessly for hours, the sprawling mansions of Beverly Hills mocking her with their silent, imposing facades. She had no one. Her parents were gone, and her few friends from her old life had drifted away during her decade inside Julian's exclusive world. She had poured everything she was into him and the children, and in doing so, had erased her own support system. Finally, with her gas tank nearing empty and nowhere else to go, she remembered Chloe. Chloe Chen, a sharp, witty fellow curator from her days at the museum. They had been close once, sharing dreams over cheap wine in their tiny apartments. Chloe was married now to Robert Chen, Julian's former business partner. The two men had had a bitter falling out years ago, and as a result, the friendship between the two women had withered. It was a long shot, a desperate grasp at a frayed thread from her past. She found Chloe's address online and drove to a modest but charming house in a quiet Pasadena neighborhood. It felt like a different universe from Bel Air. When Chloe opened the door, her face registered a series of emotions. First surprise, then confusion, and finally, a deep, knowing sympathy. Lyra broke down on her doorstep, the whole sordid story pouring out of her in a torrent of tears and ragged breaths. Chloe listened patiently, her expression hardening with anger on Lyra's behalf. Without a word, she pulled Lyra inside, sat her down on a comfortable sofa, and wrapped a blanket around her trembling shoulders. "That monster," Chloe said, her voice shaking with rage. "I never trusted Beatrice. Robert always said she was a snake." She handed Lyra a cup of tea. "You're staying here. For as long as you need, we'll figure this out." The days that followed were a blur of shock and agonizing helplessness. Lyra slept on the couch in Chloe's living room, waking up each morning with a disorienting moment of panic before the horrific reality came crashing back down. She was homeless, penniless. Her clothes, her belongings, her entire life were locked away in that mansion. Julian had given her a supplementary credit card, but she received an email notification that it had been cancelled by the primary account holder, Beatrice. She spent her days frantically calling lawyers. The response was universally disheartening. The moment they heard she wasn't married to Julian, their tone changed from sympathetic to dismissive. "Ms. Hayes, without a marriage certificate or a clear contractual agreement, your legal standing is tenuous at best." One lawyer told her, his voice dripping with condescension. "A Marvin claim is notoriously difficult and expensive to litigate," another explained, "and against the estate of Julian Theron. You'd be going up against a legal army with unlimited resources. I'm sorry, but we can't take this case." Rejection after rejection hammered home her new reality. In the eyes of the law, she was a ghost. Her 10 years of love, labor, and sacrifice meant nothing. Her only proof of existence was in the hearts of 2 children she was forbidden to see. The media inevitably got the story. Beatrice, with a professional PR team spinning the narrative, was painted as the grieving sister stepping in to protect her orphaned niece and nephew from a disgruntled ex-girlfriend. Tabloid headlines screamed, "Billionaire's lover demands payout," and "The gold digger of Bel Air." They used flattering airbrushed photos of Beatrice and Julian from years ago, and a grainy, unflattering paparazzi shot of Lyra looking distraught outside the gates. She was being systematically erased, her character assassinated, her role as a mother rewritten into something ugly and opportunistic. Every article, every condescending lawyer, every day that passed without the sound of Mia's laughter or Leo's chatter chipped away at her spirit. Curled up on Chloe's couch one night, watching the lights of passing cars play across the ceiling, she hit rock bottom. Hope was a luxury she could no longer afford. The gilded cage had been flung open, only to reveal a void, an endless, terrifying emptiness where her life used to be. Just when the despair was about to consume her, a flicker of hope arrived in the form of a referral from one of the few lawyers who had shown her a shred of compassion. "I can't take your case," he had said, "but I know a guy. He's not a fancy corporate shark. He's a brawler. If anyone is crazy enough to go up against the Theron estate, it's Daniel Sterling." Daniel Sterling's office was a world away from the polished mahogany of Sullivan and Cromwell. It was a cluttered second-floor walk-up in a less fashionable part of the city, smelling faintly of old books and strong coffee. The man himself was just as unpretentious, rumpled energetic, with a sharp, intelligent gaze that seemed to see right through the wall of hopelessness Lyra had built around herself. He listened to her entire story, without interruption, leaning back in his creaky office chair, his expression growing more intense with every detail. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. "They're counting on you to roll over and disappear," he said, finally, his voice a low growl. "They think you have no money, no power, and no fight left in you. Are they right?" "No." Lyra whispered the word fragile but definite. "I can't disappear. My children." "They're not legally your children." Daniel countered, his tone blunt but not unkind. "That's the first thing you have to understand. Emotionally, morally, you're their mother. Legally, you're a third party. Our job is to bridge that gap. It's a legal Hail Mary, Lyra. We need to prove an implied contract. We need to show that you and Julian had a tacit agreement. You would dedicate your life to being a wife and mother, and in return he would provide for you for the rest of your life." "He promised," she said, her voice cracking. "He always said he would take care of us. A promise isn't enough. We need evidence. Emails, text messages, voicemails, letters. Witnesses who can testify to the nature of your relationship. We need to paint a picture for a judge that is so vivid and compelling that it makes that 7-year-old will look like what it is, a forgotten, obsolete piece of paper." The task felt monumental, but for the first time in weeks, Lyra felt a surge of purpose. The fight had a name, a Marvin claim, and a general. Daniel Sterling. They started digging. Lyra, with Chloe's help, spent hours combing through a decade of her digital life. They found photos of family vacations, videos of birthday parties, screenshots of text exchanges with Julian, filled with "I love yous," and discussions about the children's futures. They found emails to the school where Lyra signed off as Lyra Hayes Theron, a name she used for convenience, a name Julian had never corrected. The hardest part was reaching out to potential witnesses. The staff at the mansion were a wall of silence. Daniel's investigator discovered that Beatrice had made every single employee, from the chef to the gardeners, sign a new ironclad non-disclosure agreement with a multi-million-dollar penalty clause. They were terrified. But then came a breakthrough. One evening, a black car pulled up outside Chloe's house. A woman got out, her head covered by a scarf. It was Maria, the head housekeeper, a woman who had worked for Julian for 15 years and had been a quiet, steady presence in the children's lives. Her eyes were filled with fear, but also with resolve. "I cannot testify. Senora Lyra," she whispered, her hands trembling as she spoke to Lyra on the porch. "Senorita Beatrice, she is a dangerous woman. She threatened to have my family in Guatemala reported, but I cannot let her do this to you, to the children." From a cloth bag, Maria produced a small, unassuming cardboard box. "When she took over, she had me clear out your painting studio. She said to throw everything away." "It's all junk," she said. "But I saved a few things. I thought you might want them." Lyra took the box with trembling hands. Later that night, she sat on the floor of the living room and went through its contents. It was mostly a collection of painful memories, old tubes of paint, sketches of Mia and Leo when they were toddlers, a dried flower from a bouquet Julian had once given her. She was about to close the lid when her fingers brushed against something tucked into a side pocket of a painter's smock. It was a cocktail napkin, thick, expensive linen from the Post Ranch Inn in Big Sur, a place they'd gone for their first anniversary. and on it, in Julian's familiar, sprawling handwriting, was a hastily scrawled note. Draft 1.0, it was titled, "Everything to my Lyra. She gets the house, the accounts, everything. She will be the best guardian for my babies. She is my life. Need to get Finch to make this real ASAP." It was undated, unsigned, and legally worthless. But it was everything. It was proof. It was his intention, written in his own hand. A message from beyond the grave. Lyra burst into tears, clutching the fragile piece of paper to her chest. It wasn't a contract, but it was a key. When Daniel saw it, his eyes lit up. "This doesn't win the case," he said, his voice taut with excitement. "But it gets us in the door. It gives our story an anchor. It shows his state of mind." Energized, they filed the lawsuit. The reaction was immediate and brutal. Beatrice's legal team, led by a notoriously aggressive lawyer named Marcus Thorne, filed a motion to dismiss, calling the claim frivolous, insulting, and a shameless attempt to extort a grieving family. The tabloids went into a frenzy. Anonymous sources close to the family were quoted describing Lyra as unstable and manipulative, a woman who had tried to trap a vulnerable billionaire. They dredged up an old boyfriend from college who likely paid for his story, claimed Lyra had always been ruthless about climbing the social ladder. Her character was being systematically dismantled in the court of public opinion. The pressure was immense. Lyra stopped looking at the internet, stopped watching the news. Some days the weight of the fight, the public humiliation and the agonizing ache of missing the children felt like too much to bear. But then she would look at the cocktail napkin, at Julian's handwriting, at the words, "My Lyra and my babies." This wasn't about money or a mansion. It was about truth. It was a battle for her identity, for her past, and for the future of the two children she loved more than life itself. She was no longer a victim. She was a fighter. The day of the preliminary hearing arrived under a bruised grey sky that threatened rain, a perfect mirror for the tempest churning in Lyra's stomach. She sat beside Daniel Sterling at the plaintiff's table, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap. Her knuckles were white. The courtroom, though smaller than she'd imagined from movies, felt vast and suffocating. It was packed with a tense, murmuring crowd, reporters poised with their pens like vultures, Beatrice's cadre of sleek lawyers, and a few curious members of the public drawn by the high-profile nature of the case. Across the aisle, Beatrice sat enthroned, a study in icy composure, in a navy blue suit that probably cost more than Lyra's entire wardrobe. Flanked by her lead counsel, the notoriously ruthless Marcus Thorne, she exuded an aura of untouchable power. For a fleeting moment, her eyes met Lyra's, and the look she sent across the room was one of pure, unadulterated loathing, a silent promise of annihilation. The judge, a formidable woman named Evelyn Diaz, with sharp eyes and a reputation for cutting through legal theatrics, called the room to order. The silence that fell was immediate and absolute. Marcus Thorne argued first, his voice a rich, confident baritone that filled every corner of the room. He moved with the predatory grace of a shark painting Lyra not just as an opportunist, but as a parasite. "Your Honor," he began, his tone dripping with condescension, "what we have here is not a complex legal matter. It is a simple and frankly distasteful case of entitlement. Ms. Hayes was a long-term house guest who enjoyed a decade of unimaginable luxury. She flew on private jets, she wore designer clothes, she lived in a mansion all on Julian Theron's dime. This was not a partnership, it was a lavish arrangement. And now that her benefactor has tragically passed, she has come to the court with her hand out, attempting a desperate and insulting cash grab. He waved away the 10 years of Lyra's life with a flick of his wrist. The defense will show you pictures of birthday parties. They will show you texts with heart emojis. It is all meaningless noise designed to obscure the one unassailable fact in this case. He paused for dramatic effect, tapping a thick leather-bound document on his table. This, the last will and testament of Julian Alexander Theron. Signed, witnessed, and legally ironclad. His intentions are crystal clear in this document. Everything for his children managed by his own flesh and blood, his sister. To suggest anything else is to slander the memory of a great man by implying he was either a fool or a liar. When it was Daniel's turn, his approach was the antithesis of Thorne's bluster. He stood not moving from his place and spoke quietly, forcing the courtroom to lean in and listen. His voice was laced with a compelling intensity that commanded attention more effectively than any shout. Your Honor, Mr. Thorne is correct about one thing. This case is about the intentions of Julian Theron. But a man's intentions are not always contained within the four corners of a single 7-year-old document. A man's life, his heart, his promises. They are written in the 10 years he spends with a person. They are written in the family he builds. Daniel began to tell a story. He didn't use legal jargon. He used names. He spoke of Lyra teaching Mia to read of her nursing Leo through a dangerous fever, of the thousands of meals shared, the nightmares, soothed the triumphs celebrated. He presented the evidence not as legal exhibits, but as chapters in a life. The photos, the emails to the school, signed Lyra Hayes Theron. The texts filled with love and mundane family plans. Finally, he held up a clear plastic sleeve containing the cocktail napkin. This is not a will, Your Honor. Daniel said, his voice ringing with conviction. It is a window into a man's heart. Everything to my Lyra. She gets the house, the accounts, everything. She will be the best guardian for my babies. She is my life. This is a statement of intent, a promise Julian Theron made to the woman he loved, a promise he tragically did not have time to formalize. Thorne and Beatrice scoffed audibly. Judge Diaz's expression was unreadable, but she leaned forward. Her eyes narrowed. Lyra could see the conflict. The law was on Beatrice's side, but the truth, the human truth, was on hers. Still, it felt like it wasn't enough. Lyra's heart sank as she saw the judge's gaze return to the formal will on Thorne's desk. The defense claims this is a frivolous lawsuit. Daniel continued, his voice rising, drawing the judge's attention back. They claim Ms. Hayes was nothing more than a glorified employee. They would have you believe that Julian Theron, a genius known for his meticulous forward-thinking planning in every aspect of his multi-billion-dollar business, simply forgot about the woman who was the center of his universe and the mother of his children. We believe there is another, more plausible explanation for this discrepancy, and to speak to that, the plaintiff calls Robert Chen to the stand. A palpable shockwave rippled through the courtroom. Beatrice's head snapped towards the back of the room, her icy composure finally cracking, replaced by a flicker of pure panic. Robert Chen, Julian's estranged best friend and the co-founder of Theron Innovations, walked steadily towards the witness stand. He was a billionaire in his own right, one of the few people Beatrice couldn't intimidate. and as he passed her table, he looked at her with an expression of profound, weary disappointment. Under Daniel's careful questioning, Robert began to speak. He described his decades-long friendship with Julian, painting a picture of the man, not the myth. He called Lyra his salvation. Robert said, his voice thick with emotion. After his first wife died, Julian was a ghost. He was drowning. Lyra didn't just save him, she brought him back to life. She gave him a reason to come home at night. She built a family for him, from scratch out of love. If he loved her so much, Daniel asked gently, why did he never marry her? Why did he allow this 7-year-old will to stand? Robert took a deep breath and looked directly at Beatrice, his gaze unflinching. Because of her, he said, his voice resonating with years of frustration. Julian was terrified of his sister. Not in a physical sense, but he was terrified of her cruelty. She was ruthlessly ambitious and pathologically jealous of his success. Julian knew that if he married Lyra, and something happened to him, Beatrice would contest the marriage. She would drag Lyra and his late wife's memory through the mud, claiming he was mentally unstable, that Lyra had manipulated a grieving widower. He thought, foolishly, tragically, that by keeping things unofficial he was creating a shield. He was protecting Lyra and the children from Beatrice's poison. Beatrice leaped to her feet. Objection. This is baseless, slanderous speculation. Sit down, Mr. Thorne. Judge Diaz commanded, her eyes fixed on Robert. The witness will be heard. Continue, Mr. Chen. He wasn't procrastinating on updating the will. Robert said, his voice firm and clear. He was strategizing. He was trying to find the perfect, unassailable way to protect his real family. He and I had been talking for months about it. He had secretly engaged a different lawyer, a specialist in trust and estate law, from a firm with no ties to Sullivan and Cromwell. He was building a fortress to keep Beatrice out. He knew his longtime attorney, Alistair Finch, was loyal to the old family guard to Beatrice. Do you have any proof of these conversations? Mr. Chen Daniel asked the final question, landing in the silent room. This was the moment. The air crackled with anticipation. Robert looked at the judge. I do, Your Honor. Daniel's assistant brought a sealed file to the clerk. As copies were distributed, Lyra watched Beatrice's face. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving behind a waxy, pale mask of fury and fear. Marcus Thorne ripped open his copy, and his eyes widened as he scanned the first page. It was a series of emails between Robert and Julian, dated in the final weeks before the plane crash. Lyra watched as Judge Diaz read them, her expression shifting from judicial neutrality to intense, focused concentration. The final email, at Daniel's request, was displayed on the large courtroom monitors for everyone to see. The words, written by a man who thought he had a future, appeared like a ghost in the machine. Rob, you're right. I have to stop being afraid of B. This whole charade has gone on long enough. I'm meeting with the new lawyer, Sarah Jenkins, on Tuesday to sign everything. The new will, the trust, the whole 9 yards. It's time to make it official. Lyra is my wife in all but name, and she's the only mother Mia and Leo have. My #1 priority now is to protect her and the kids from Beatrice no matter what. She's my family now, the only family that matters. The courtroom was utterly, profoundly silent. The email was a thunderclap, a voice from the grave that laid the truth bare. It wasn't just intent, it was a documented plan, aborted by a twist of fate. Beatrice was exposed. Her carefully constructed narrative of the dutiful sister shattered, revealing the predator beneath. She was no guardian. She was a usurper, who had exploited a tragedy for personal gain. She sat shrunken and diminished, staring blankly ahead as her lawyer shuffled his papers, all the fight and bluster having evaporated from him completely. Faced with a public relations catastrophe and a legal case that had become overwhelmingly, indefensibly strong, Beatrice folded. The settlement was hammered out in a series of tense private meetings. Lyra didn't get half the fortune. She had never wanted it. The agreement provided her with a generous lifetime trust, ensuring she and the children would be secure. But the true victory was not financial. The core of the settlement, the clause she had fought for with every fiber of her being, was that Beatrice would immediately renounce her guardianship. The court, based on the new evidence, would grant it solely to Lyra. She had her children back. The final scene of the drama was not written in a courtroom or a mansion. It was 6 months later. The Bel Air estate, a monument to a life that no longer existed, had been sold. Its sterile grandeur was replaced by something infinitely better. Lyra stood in the sun-drenched backyard of a beautiful welcoming home in Santa Barbara, the scent of salt from the nearby ocean, mixing with the smell of jasmine climbing a trellis. The house was a fraction of the size of the old one, but it felt 1,000 times larger, filled not with the ghosts of the past, but with the boundless promise of the future. Mia, now 13. Her face, free from the shadows of grief and fear, was showing Lyra a charcoal sketch of the ocean. Leo 11 was excitedly explaining his detailed architectural plans to build a tree house in the majestic oak tree that shaded the lawn. They were healing. They were laughing. They were home. Lyra watched them, her heart overflowing with a love that had been tested by fire and had emerged stronger and more real than any legal document. She had lost a billionaire, but she had found herself. She was no longer Julian Theron's unofficial wife, a phantom resident of his gilded cage. She was Lyra Hayes, a mother, a survivor, and for the first time in a very long time, as the warm California sun fell on her face, she was truly, completely free. Lyra's story is a harrowing reminder that love, sacrifice, and devotion are not always enough to protect us. It's a story about the vast difference between what is morally right and what is legally written, and how easily a life can be shattered by a forgotten piece of paper. She fought a titan of industry and a deeply manipulative system, not for a fortune, but for the one thing that truly mattered: her family. Her victory wasn't just in the courtroom. It was in rebuilding a life on her own terms, proving that a mother's love is a force more powerful than any will or testament. What did you think of Lyra's incredible journey? Do you think the legal system failed her? Let us know in the comments below. If this story moved you, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more true life dramas you won't want to miss.